Is Hebrews chapter 11 verses 1 to 13. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. By faith, Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as a righteous man, when God spoke well of his offerings, and by faith he still speaks, even though he is dead. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life, so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists, and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built a thing that not yet seen, ark to save his family. By his faith he condemned the word and became heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. By faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in a tent, and as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heir with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith Abraham, even though he was past age, and Sarah herself was barren, was enabled to become a father because he considered him faithful who made the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. All these people who were still living by faith when they died, they did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, and they admitted that they were aliens and strangers on earth.
We're coming back to our study of the letter to the Hebrews, chapter 11, this great chapter often called the Hall of Faith of the Bible, and these various individuals whose stories are offered to us as examples of what faith looks like in a real human being. And I want us to look at two people that are mentioned this morning. First of all, Enoch. Our writer says, by faith Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. That's it. And the other is Noah. By faith Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. So these two men, what's so important, what's so significant about Enoch? Well, by now using the writer to Hebrews as our guide, what we should do is we should look back to the Old Testament and we should read the story of Enoch. And if we read that story, it will perhaps help us to understand more about what he is wanting us to understand about faith. So here we are, Enoch. When Enoch lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. After becoming the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked faithfully with God 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Enoch lived a total of 365 years. Enoch walked faithfully with God, then he was no more because God took him. That's it. And you sort of think, well, what's famous about Enoch? Okay, he lived a very long time, but so it seems everyone else lived a very long time in those days. He didn't actually live all that long compared with the others. His own son lived 3 times longer than he did. He didn't do anything famous. The way he ended his life is a bit unusual. It seems that he didn't die. He was just taken away one day. One day he was there, next day he wasn't there. Nobody could find Enoch. Have you seen him? No. Saw him last Thursday in Tesco's, but I haven't seen him since. So there was no sign of him. And yet we're offered to him as an evidence of faith at work. Okay, we'll hold that at one side at the moment. So what's famous about Noah? We haven't got time to look at the story of Noah. We could have 2 or 3 sermons about Noah. Noah was an incredible character. First of all, Noah was a man who was open to totally new ideas being presented to him by God. For example, he was going to build an ark. What's an ark? It's a big boat. What's a boat? It's something that floats on the sea. What's the sea? The sea is a big bit of water a long way from here. Okay, I'll build your boat for you, God. He was a man who had huge organizational skills. He had to round up pairs or sevens of all the animals that existed and get them onto this boat because there was going to be a big flood. And Noah apparently had no difficulty doing this. I can't get my dog to come to me when we're out in the countryside. How he was able to do this with all these animals, I do not know. He lived in terrible times. Things were just going downhill all the way. But he was willing to keep faith with God, to do what God wanted. And after he endured the experience of the flood and several hundred days in a not hugely big boat with a large number of animals was endurance. However you looked at it, I am sure there was more than one occasion where Noah thought, I'm getting off this boat, I'm just going to give my chance swimming. At the end of that endurance, Noah entered a new covenant with God and was responsible for establishing a new relationship between human beings and the world. And just because the Bible is always good in its portrayal of people, Noah was not a perfect man. And if you look at the end of his life, there was one embarrassing and shameful addition. So here are 2 men, and in some respects they couldn't be more different from each other. Noah is used by people who give courses in management skills to young businessmen. And they tell the story of Noah to teach business techniques. There is not a business school in the world would take Enoch and say you can learn how to be good at business by reading the story of Enoch. Because Enoch was, and Enoch walked with God, and Enoch was not. That's his story. So what have these two men got in common? Maybe that'll help us to understand what living the life of faith is like. Well, the first thing they have in common is they both lived, I use in the notes this fancy word, countercultural. They both lived in dire times, and they didn't go along with the world. When I was talking to the children, talked about the company we keep and how it affects the way we live. There is an old poem, no one who knows who wrote it, but I'll just read it to you. It's an Irish poem. It was a year ago, September, a day I well remember. I was walking up and down in drunken pride. When my knees began to flutter, I fell down in the gutter, and a pig came by and lay down by my side. As I lay there in the gutter, thinking thoughts I should not utter, I heard a passing lady say, "You can tell a man who boozes by the company he chooses," and with that the pig got up and walked away. Now the point about both these men is they were the pigs that got up and walked away. They did not go along with all the terrible things that were going on in the world in their time. In fact, these terrible things went on for hundreds of years. All of God's grace was being rejected. All of God's benevolence was being taken for granted. All God's principles were being ignored. But these two men lived in a different direction. They lived in a Godward direction in a world that was not a Godward world. And that is a theme you find throughout the whole Bible. Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what is God's will, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Don't be conformed to the world's pattern. Oh, what a big mistake the church so often makes, of trying to conform itself to the world's pattern in the hope that that will make us more popular. Paul, writing to the Galatians, the passage that Betty read to us, says, I say, live by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh. They are in conflict with each other, so that you are not to do whatever you want. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are under the law. He exhorts everyone to live by the Spirit, keep in step with the Spirit. That's what these men did. And why did they do that? They did it because they feared the judgments of God. That God holds us all accountable for the lives that we live and the actions we do and the things we want those who are more powerful than us to do for us. And so the writer to the Hebrews says in chapter 11, verse 7, by faith Noah, when warned about things not seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. He accepted that the judgment of God was a right judgment on the world. And the letter to Jude, that's just a little letter you find further on in the New Testament, very short letter of only one chapter, says of Enoch, Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about them, "See, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to judge everyone and to convict them of their ungodly acts they have committed in their ungodliness, and of all the defiant words ungodly sinners have spoken against him." They feared the judgment of God. They didn't have this view of God that God was a nice old chap and he wasn't too bothered about what people did or how they behaved and so on. And that influenced their thinking about the way they lived. And the third thing is that they didn't keep it to themselves. They declared the righteousness of God to the world. And that was probably the biggest act of faith of these two men. Peter, in his second letter, refers to Noah as a preacher of righteousness, and the verse in Jude I just read refers to Enoch as the man prophesying, declaring about God to the world around. And we do not need anything in Scripture to tell us that would have been difficult for them. Because you know, as I know, that when the world is choosing to go the wrong way, to go away from God, if we are so bold as to say that's wrong, that puts us under the judgment of God if we do that. People do not want to hear that. They don't want all this condemnation. They don't want criticism of their actions. They just want things to be nice and fun and pleasant. And that, I suppose, explains to us why in Norwich Cathedral they have a helter-skelter. And when challenged about the helter-skelter, they said, well, you can see the stained glass better from the top of it. I cannot see Enoch supporting a helter-skelter in a cathedral. And I cannot see Noah thinking opening the nave of another cathedral for a crazy golf course was quite the right way to go. So the thing that these two men had in common was they were prepared to be different in this bad world. And that was, for them, expressed by our writer as walking with God. That's just a simple picture to have, to walk with God. And suddenly it takes away the idea that we have to have lots of rituals, that we have to be very clever, that we have to be very good at evangelizing, that we have to be prepared to do all sorts of strange things as part of our faith. It's just very simply this: walking with God. Getting up in the morning, good morning, Lord. Thank you for the new day. What shall I do today? Going out to work or to your friends. Well, Lord, you know I find this is difficult. The work I've been given is hard. The people around me are very challenging to me. Lord, help me. Keep me in step with your Spirit. Lord, it's the end of the day. I'm feeling weary. Your word says those who wait on you will renew their strength. Lord, renew my strength at the end of the day. Have an evening for entertainment. Lord, keep me from going somewhere I shouldn't, doing something I ought not. Now the day is ended. I lay down, and my head is safe on the pillow, because you're here. And while I sleep, you won't. These men walked with God. And it's a measure of what value God himself puts on an individual who has no fame, who did nothing special whatever, who did not even manage to live as long as his contemporaries, and says, he lived by faith. He walked with God. And in verse 6 of Hebrews 11, the writer says, there are three things we need to do in order to walk with God. The first thing is we have to believe that God exists. And you think, of course we believe that God exists. But actually, he's already prepared the ground for that, because he's given us a picture of the God who reveals himself in his word, the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, because he has already shown us certain things about God. I'll remind you of those. He's shown us that God is a powerful creator. Everything that there is was made by God. He's shown us that God made human beings in his image. That is, we are actually, though we might not believe it, like God. He enjoys fellowship with us. That business of walking with God, it's not a burden, it's a pleasure. If I say to my dog, do you like to go for a walk, Lacey? She doesn't say, oh, I don't know whether I ought to. Oh, it might be difficult. I might not do it very well. She bounds forward in absolute delight and starts barking ahead of, yes, we're going for a walk. And God says, would you like to walk with me? You don't say, I'm not sure if I want to do that today. Of course, I want to walk with you, Lord, because he enjoys the fellowship of his people. He's not ashamed of us, even though we're often ashamed of ourselves. And he judges all human activity. We've already spoken of that. And he makes the first move when we get it wrong. Noah lived in these terrible dark days. God's judgment of the world in Noah's day was that God regretted he had made it. That's human language being used to help us to understand how he felt. And so what did he say to Noah? Build an ark. He's making the first step in salvation. So that's the God we believe in. The second thing our writer says is we will draw near to God so that we can have this fellowship he's encouraging us to. And the third thing he says is that if we respond to him, he responds to us. And we find when we read the Bible, suddenly we start to hear him. It's like he's speaking to me in his word. And when we pray, we think, this is the most natural thing in the world to tell my Father. And when we sing his praise, we think, well, I don't have a brilliant voice, but that doesn't matter, because I want to tell God how much I appreciate him, and I know he hears me. And so we must believe that he responds to us. What did they do? They believed God exists. They drew near to God in difficult times, and they believed he responded to them. So what does faith look like? Well, in these two men it was the same but different. in Enoch, the thing that marked him out was he walked with God. You can tell a man who boozes by the company he chooses. And with that, the pig got up and walked away. You can tell a person who walks with God. And that's living by faith. And in Noah, well, it was walking away from the crowd, walking against the crowd. I'm not going along with the world. Okay? Laugh at my boat building skills. Laugh at my trying to understand how to get elephants onto a boat. Laugh at the fact there's just my family coming with me. But I'm going to do it, even though I am swimming against the tide. But that's faith. And it looks different in different people. But our writer says, we live by faith in God who loved us and whose Son saved us, and whose we are and whom we serve.